Hello guys, welcome back. I'm Halifax, and in the last video we talked about how we can basically load our shaders into the wrapper, our custom shaders. Basically how we can swap an existing shader with one of our own, and we used Broken Age and Wolfenstein The New Order to show how we can do this in both ways the wrapper currently supports. In this video, however, we are going to talk about how we can enable an additional convergence preset. Now, this feature most of the time it is necessary, especially for shooter games like first-person shooter games where you will have a convergence setting for normal gameplay, and you want a different convergence setting, for example when you're aiming or looking down the barrel of the weapon, or for other reasons basically. Now I talked in an earlier video that there are a couple of ways you can do this automatically, which I'm going to show in this series of videos, probably in the next episode, where we are going to talk about how we can modify shaders into much more in-depth basically. So that is one opportunity where you can do it per shader, while this function basically covers the whole convergence value that is being applied to all the shaders. So, like I said, some games require this, other games don't require it, so it's up to you. Before we get started, I want to say one last thing. With this video, I'm going to conclude basically the normal usage or the easier usage of the wrapper. Once this is ended, basically you will know everything there is to know about the wrapper, how you can hook it to an engine, an OpenGL engine, how you can enable 3D vision, how you can make 3D vision or the engine rendered in stereo 3D by injecting stereoscopy inside the engine's shaders. You can also You will also know, or you should also know, how you can find an individual shader, how you can disable a certain shader, how you can swap the source code of a certain shader, and stuff like this basically, which by the end of the day is enough for making a simple fix where you either display some shaders for the UI and stuff like that in 2D, and you disable other shaders like for shadows or smoke or stuff like that that you don't want to display. So most of the times, even if it's not the complete experience of a game, this should be enough to get a clean stereo 3D rendering. So yeah, like I said, this will be the last video of the basics basically. In the next couple of videos we are going to talk about more advanced stuff and how we can edit shaders in real time, how we can change shaders, how we can modify them, how we can make them render in stereo 3D alongside the other shaders, and so on and so on. But in this video we are going to talk how we can enable an additional convergence preset. So let's get started. As you know from the last video, we are still using Broken Age. We are loading some of our shaders. All of them currently are in 2D. So all the shaders are basically used for the UI. So the UI is displayed in 2D. In this video we are going to talk how we can enable an additional convergence preset. for this game. So we are going to start the game first. As you can see, the game starts just like before. We load the game, the menu is 2D. Now using the normal NVIDIA keys, which I'm going to show it for the sake of this video, are predefined here. Increasing the convergence is control numpad plus in my case, numpad minus for decreasing. The frustum we are not going to use in this video. Saving game changes is control plus numpad backslash or slash. So back in the game, we are going to increase the convergence. We are keep the buttons pressed and we are increasing. So let's say we want something like this. The UI is still, as you can see, rendering perfectly. So we want this convergence setting, for example. We press control numpad slash, we save it. So this convergence value should be saved. Just to double check, we are launching Broken Age again, and it should be that, yeah, as you can see, the previously saved convergence setting is applied, still remembered. Now this happens because, if you remember in the introduction, or actually the getting started video, the wrapper comes with this NVIDIA inspector profile, which, sorry about that, which by default has a convergence value of 0.0 something, so basically, or almost 0. And if you remember in the getting started video, we add this profile in NVIDIA inspector and we attach our game to that profile. So because we have this profile, all the changes to the convergence and depth in the game are being saved when you use the NVIDIA hotkeys, basically. So we have this value, and you can see this value is being remembered between game launches. Sorry. So if you really want to see the value, or if the wrapper has the ability to show the current depth information and the current convergence values that are being applied to this game, if you press F10, so F10, you'll get a message box basically, which will say the current 3 division setting, the separation, which is the depth, but is the actual value rather than the percentage that you see here. So this is the percentage, this is the actual depth, yeah, the actual depth, and the separation, which is actually a little mathematical calculation to get to this value, is based on this depth, based on the screen size and the eye separation and some other stuff. Most of the times this value shouldn't change. Now if I increase the depth even more, so Control F4, I think I hit, let's refresh this one, I think I hit 100%. Yeah, as you can see, if you look closely to the picture, you can see the depth changing in the background. See? So we'll increase it even more. I talked in another video about the depth hack that you can use, so I'm not going to talk about it. So you can see the separation now, it's 0.26 something. Now if we decrease it, the separation is actually 1.5 something. So that value basically changes based on this value. and your screen size. Now the wrapper currently doesn't support any option of using the separation because it doesn't really need to. This is something that needs to be applied overall rather than applied to some elements. However, it does support the ability to load a custom convergence. So if, like I showed before, this is the default convergence of the game. So for example, I want a different convergence. I want this convergence. If I press F10, I get the new convergence value, which is 8546 point something. So I'm going to close that one. I'm going back. Going to close that one as well. Going back in the games folder, and I'm going to open the configuration file. And here we have an alternative 3D settings section where we can say, yes, we want to enable, I'm going to talk about this option in a second, because that's, yeah, I'm going to talk about it in a second. So before we do anything, we want this value, which we are going to write it here, 8546 dot 697266, for example, and we want to specify a key. Now if you want to use the F keys, these are the codes. The key codes must, the key codes must be written here in hexadecimal, basically in hex. So the left mouse button is 01, secondary is 02, middle mouse button is 04. So I'm going to use the middle mouse button 04, and when I press it, basically it will apply this convergence. So now if I restart the game, I'm not going to save those settings. So if I restart the game, you can see we have the previous value, which was the one that we actually saved in the NVIDIA profile using the NVIDIA shortcut. So we have this one. Now if I press the middle mouse button, you can see how a new value is being added. Now there is another option here, which is basically a toggle value. At the moment, by default, the new convergence value is being applied as long as you keep pressing the button that you assigned in the configuration file. So the moment I release it, it gets back to the default value. See? Now if here I'm going to say true, instead of being a press and hold functionality, you will get a toggles functionality, which means that we load the game again, you press once and release, and now I'm not pressing the middle mouse button and we still get the new or the alternative convergence that we said. This is a toggle or a switch basically. If we press again, we get the default value. We press again, we switch to the alternative convergence setting, and so on and so on. As you can see, the shaders that we added as the exception are not affected because they are rendered in 2D. So, see? Only the shaders in which we inject stereoscopy are being affected basically. So, we are going to quit. And basically this is everything there is about this value. One last thing that I want to tell you about or to talk about is, for example, I already put here the left, right and middle mouse button. values. If you have a mouse like I do with multiple buttons, currently only these buttons are supported because this is the standard mouse. Every standard mouse has at least 3 buttons. All the other buttons that your mouse might have are not exposed because they are not accessible directly by the wrapper, and in order to access them, basically I will need to implement the direct input part into the wrapper, so I can map different buttons from an actual device rather than the generic values that you see here. But I do believe that most of the times, actually all of the times, these mouse buttons should be enough, should suffice basically. But if you want to add a different keyboard key, except F1, F2, and F3, if you open Google and you say keyboard key codes, you probably the first one will be from Adobe. In my case it's from Adobe, and you find all the key codes here. There is a little thing which I want to show. For example, F1 is displayed as 113, which this is basically the decimal value. So in base 10, if I run calculator, I put, this is in programmer mode, Alt 3. If I put 113 and I convert it to hex, it's actually 71, which you can see it here as F2. So this issue is exactly how you can find all the keyboard keys. If you want to, you have page down, all the keys basically. So if you want to add insert, for example, which is 45 in hex, is 2D, so you add 2D, and that's it. So like I said, and I'm going to show it again before I'm going to close this video, in every game where the wrapper is working, if you press F10, you will get the current 3D vision settings, which is the separation and the convergence that are being currently applied to this game. And the convergence and separation, the separation is actually calculated on the fly, the convergence is actually read, sorry. It's actually read from the NVIDIA profile that the game is currently using. And you can take this value and apply it here as an alternative to the convergence. This menu, current 3D vision settings menu, is only available in the development side of the library. So if you are using the release variant, this will not be available. So if you press F10 during a game using the release one, you will not see this pop up. The reason I did that is because most of the times F10 is bound in different games, or you can bind in other games or stuff like that, so I didn't want to add a special key reserved in all the games or applications on F10. But if you really want to see and to calculate and see what settings are applied, you can use the development branch, basically, version of the wrapper. So with that being said, we've covered the basic functionality of the wrapper. So how you can start fixing a game, how we are hooking the wrapper with the game, how we can enable 3D vision, how we are actually making the game render in stereoscopy. Like you saw, basically only if you only enable 3D vision, the game will render the same image for both eyes. So we need to actually tell the game, hey, I want stereo 3D, not flat 2D or 3D, and some other options that you find in the configuration file. Then we've talked about the depth hack option and how we can find a shader by using the shader pair function basically, and how we can load our modified or our shaders and swap them at runtime. And we talked about the two variants of engines that are out there and how we are handling both of those variants, and how we can apply a different convergence value if we need to. If we don't need to, no need to do this step. In the next video, which will start the advanced section, because it will be more advanced with more technical terms and stuff like that than these videos. So it requires a more in-depth understanding of what's actually going on. We'll talk about shaders, how we can compile them in real time, how we can calculate, how we can fix them and stuff like that. And yeah, for the last video, for the 8th video basically, I'm going to talk about here I should say highly advanced stuff. Is basically how you can create your own FPS injector, or actually not how you can create, but actually how you can use your own FPS injector with this wrapper. So I'm not going to tell at this moment anything else about this function. I'm going to talk about it in depth when we reach that point. And the last one, which is actually the sum or the wrap, or it's the finish of the current videos, we're going to talk about how you can actually make a fix release, because when we are releasing a fix, we don't want to release with a development branch, but rather with a release branch. I enumerated in the introduction why this is wanted and this is needed. Basically, it generates the release version is a much more efficient code rather than the development code, so your FPS will have to suffer in the development mode. But we'll talk about this when we get there. So with this said, I'm going to wrap up this video, and I'm going to see all of you in the next video where the real fun begins. Catch you later, guys.